I was 7 the day they weighed my worth in silver. 25 pieces. I remember the sound. Not the clink of transaction, but the way the coins hummed faintly against each other in the merchant's gloved hand, like they were singing a dirge. Like the metal itself knew what was happening and mourned for me. My aunt's fingers trembled as she accepted the pouch. She didn't count it. Didn't need to. A man like Gregor Vale didn't haggle over damaged goods, and that's what I was to them. Small, sickly, cursed. The girl born under lightning. The child who survived when her mother didn't. I watched the silver disappear into her apron, and I thought with the strange, devastating clarity that only children possess. This is the sound of love ending. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get to the story. My name is Aria, and this is the story of how I went from property to power. From the forgotten child sold at a crossroads to the Iron Queen who would make the world remember her name. But let me take you back to the beginning. To the moment everything shattered. To my 7th year. My life ended on a market day. I know that's an odd thing to say. That a life can end before a heart stops beating. But when you're 7 years old and you're being sold like a sack of grain, your mind latches onto these small, terrible truths. Market day. Early spring. The kind of cold morning where your breath turns to mist and the ground is still frozen from winter's grip. There had been no breakfast that morning. No acknowledgement that this was the anniversary of my birth, the day my mother had died bringing me screaming into the world. In our village, my birthday wasn't celebrated. It was mourned. A reminder of what was lost, not what was gained. I'd stopped expecting anything years ago. I was in the corner of my aunt's stone cottage, mending a torn apron with fingers that were clumsy from cold. The needle had pricked me 3 times already, tiny dots of red welling up on my fingertips. But as I sat there in the weak morning light filtering through the smoke hole, something strange happened. The pain began to fade. Not completely, but enough that I could flex my hands without wincing. When I looked down, the wounds seemed older, like they'd been healing for days instead of seconds. I stared at my fingers, confused. Probably just my imagination. Probably just. The knock at the door shattered my thoughts. My aunt's head snapped up from where she'd been kneading bread dough. Her movements mechanical, joyless. Her eyes, pale and red-rimmed from years of crying over things she'd never name, met mine for just a moment. And in that glance, I saw something I'd never seen before. Guilt. "Stay there," she said, her voice flat. "Don't move. Don't speak." I nodded, drawing my knees to my chest, making myself smaller. I was good at that. At disappearing. At becoming so still and quiet that people forgot I existed. In our village, where whispers followed me like shadows, cursed, marked, storm-born, invisibility was survival. The man who entered our home was like nothing I'd ever seen before. He filled the doorway, not because he was unusually tall, but because he carried himself like someone who owned every space he entered. His clothes were fine. Dark leather travel coat lined with fur, boots polished despite the muddy road outside, gloves that looked softer than anything I'd ever touched. But it was his eyes that made my stomach drop. They were the color of winter ice over a deep lake. Cold, praising, utterly empty of warmth. And they were looking at me, not the way villagers looked at me, with pity or disgust or nervous superstition. No, he looked at me the way my aunt looked at the chickens before slaughter. Like I was something to be evaluated, assessed for value, weighed against cost. Is this the child? His voice was smooth, cultured, with an accent from somewhere south. Somewhere that had never known hunger. Yes, Master Vale. My aunt's voice cracked on his name. She wrung her hands in her apron, and I noticed flour still dusted her knuckles. 7 years today. Marked at birth just as you requested. Healthy enough. Obedient. No one left to come looking for her. No one left to come looking. The words hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened. My breath caught. Stand up, girl. I looked at my aunt, desperate for some sign that this wasn't happening. That she would tell this stranger to leave. That she would remember, even for a moment, that I was blood. That my mother had been her sister. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Stand," she hissed. I scrambled to my feet, the mending falling forgotten to the packed earth floor. My legs shook. The room felt too small, too hot despite the cold air seeping through the walls. Gregor Vale circled me slowly, deliberately. I felt his gaze travel over me like cold fingers, clinical and invasive, and I wanted to scrub my skin raw, wanted to run, wanted to scream. But I'd learned long ago that screaming changed nothing. "Thin," he observed, stopping in front of me. "Malnourished, clearly. The scar, is it natural?" He gestured toward my collarbone, where my worn tunic had slipped to reveal the mark I'd carried since birth. A pale scar shaped like a star split by lightning. The mark the village elders whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear. "Born with it," my aunt said quickly. "The midwife said it was from the storm the night she came. Lightning struck close to the birthing house. Her mother," her voice broke. "Her mother didn't survive the night." Gregor reached out, and before I could flinch away, he pulled my collar down to examine the mark more closely. His gloved fingers were cold even through the leather. "Celestial marking. Very rare." He released me and stepped back, considering. I could see him calculating, weighing variables I didn't understand. "The price we discussed," he said finally. 25 silver. My aunt's eyes widened. "You said 30. That was before I saw her condition." 25. Final offer. The silence stretched. I watched my aunt's face, watched her mouth work soundlessly, and watched her gaze dart between me and the merchant and the pouch of coins he'd produced from his coat. "How do I know?" she began, her voice barely a whisper. "How do I know you won't? That she'll be cared for?" Gregor Vale smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Madam, I am a trader of rare goods. I protect my investments. The child will be fed, housed, and put to work appropriate to her abilities. She'll have far better prospects with me than wasting away in this dying village. Investments. Not child. Not Aria. Not even girl. Things." My aunt looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. For a moment, just one heartbeat, I thought she might refuse. Might tell him to leave. Might remember that 7 years ago, she'd held me as a newborn and promised my dying mother she'd keep me safe. Then she took the money. The coins made that sound, that terrible humming sound, as they passed from his hand to hers. 25 pieces of silver, clinking together like wind chimes. Like warning bells. Like the world ending in installments. "Get your things," my aunt whispered, unable to look at me. "I don't have any things," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. She flinched as if I'd struck her. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of Gregor Vale's covered wagon, watching my village disappear behind me. My aunt hadn't said goodbye. Hadn't even watched me leave. She'd turned away the moment I'd stepped out the door, her shoulders shaking with sobs that came too late to matter. The road north was rough, and I was jostled against wooden crates marked with symbols I couldn't read. It was only later, much later, that I would learn those symbols meant precious cargo and fragile. Handle with care. Not one of them was marked on me. As the wagon creaked through the frozen landscape, I pressed my small hands against the wooden slats and watched the world blur past. Bare trees. Gray sky. The northern reaches opening up before me like a vast, uncaring mouth. I didn't cry. Couldn't cry. The grief was too big, too sharp, lodged somewhere in my chest where tears couldn't reach it. Instead, I noticed something strange. When I touched the wooden slats of the wagon, they felt warm. Not from the sun, there was no sun, but warm like something alive. And when I concentrated, when I let my fingers rest against the wood just right, I could almost feel something. Hum. A whisper. Like the wagon itself was trying to tell me something. I snatched my hand back, frightened. But the humming didn't stop. It followed me north, growing stronger with every mile we traveled, until I realized it wasn't coming from the wagon at all. It was coming from the iron fittings, the metal hinges, the steel-reinforced wheels. And somehow, impossibly terrifyingly, I could hear them all singing. That was the day the world decided what I was worth. It would take years before I decided to disagree. 3 years changed everything and nothing at all. I was 10 years old when I first understood that Ironmere Keep was alive. Not alive the way people are alive, with breath and heartbeat and warm blood, but alive in the way ancient things are alive, patient, watchful, remembering. The fortress carved into the northern mountainside had stood for centuries, its black iron gates and stone walls bearing witness to wars and winters that had ground lesser structures to dust. And somehow, impossibly, it knew I was there. The first year I was too numb to notice. I moved through my days like a ghost, scrubbing floors in the kitchens, hauling water from the deep wells, mending linens by candlelight until my fingers bled and my eyes burned. Gregor Vale had delivered me to his master's estate with the same casual efficiency he'd used to drop off a crate of spices, and I'd been absorbed into the household staff like water into stone. Lord Damon Vale's keep employed dozens of servants, most of them children. I learned quickly not to ask why. Not to wonder why a lord needed so many small hands, so many quiet shadows moving through his halls. The older servants whispered when they thought we couldn't hear. Marked ones, they'd say, crossing their fingers against evil. Born under bad signs. Storm children. Omen bearers. I kept my head down and my mouth shut. I was good at that. But by the second year, I began to notice things I couldn't explain. The walls of Ironmere hummed. It was subtle at first, a vibration so faint I thought I was imagining it. But at night, when I lay on my thin pallet in the servants' quarters with a dozen other children breathing in the darkness around me, I could feel it thrumming through the stone floor. Pulse. A rhythm. Like the keep itself had a heartbeat buried somewhere deep in its foundations. The iron gates were worse. They stood 3 stories tall, black and ancient, carved with symbols that hurt to look at too long. Every morning I had to help polish them, a task that took hours and left my arms aching. But touching them was like touching something that shouldn't be touched. The metal was always cold, even in summer. And when my fingers brushed the surface, I swore I could feel it. React. Not physically. Nothing visible. But a sense of awareness, like the gates were taking note of me. Recording my presence. Remembering. I tried to tell myself I was going mad. That 3 years of servitude and loneliness had broken something in my mind. But then other things started happening. I was 12 when the whispers began. I'd been assigned to clean the upper corridors, a punishment for dropping a tray of breakfast plates that morning. My hands had been shaking from lack of sleep, and the ceramic had shattered across the kitchen stones in an explosion of sound that had earned me a sharp slap from the head cook and a day of extra duties. The upper halls were rarely used. Lord Damon kept his private chambers and study on the highest floor, but the corridors leading there were lined with locked doors and cold, dusty silence. I worked alone, scrubbing floors by torchlight, trying not to think about the fact that I couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to me kindly. That's when I heard it. Voice. Faint. Formless. Like words spoken underwater or through thick walls. Remember. Remember. We remember. I froze, my scrub brush dripping onto the stone. The corridor was empty. The nearest servant was 3 floors below. But the voice continued, growing clearer, more insistent. Pain. Betrayal. Blood on our face. We remember. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around wildly, searching for the source, and my gaze landed on the iron torch sconce mounted to the wall beside me. The voice was coming from the metal. I stumbled backward, my brush clattering to the floor. This was impossible. Insane. I was hearing things, losing my mind, finally succumbing to whatever curse the villagers had always said I carried. But then the iron spoke again, and this time I understood. Not alone. Never alone. We are here. Stop, I whispered, my voice cracking. Please stop. The whispers faded, but the presence remained. I could feel it, the awareness of the metal around me, the iron and steel that formed the bones of this place. It was watching me, waiting for something. I grabbed my brush and fled. After that night, I couldn't escape them. The whispers followed me everywhere. In the kitchens, the knives hummed against their cutting boards. In the halls, the iron hinges sang when doors opened. In the courtyard, the gates groaned with voices that sounded almost like words. I started talking back. I don't know why. Maybe because I was so desperately lonely that even phantom voices were better than silence. Maybe because some part of me recognized that these weren't hallucinations. They were something else. Something real. Late at night, when the other servants were asleep, I'd press my palm against the stone wall beside my pallet and whisper to it. Tell it about my day. About the ache in my shoulders from carrying water. About the head cook's cruelty. About how much I missed my aunt, even though she'd sold me. And the wall would whisper back. Not with words I could understand, not yet, but with sensations. Comfort. Warmth. A sense of being heard. The iron was kinder to me than any person in that place. The night everything changed, I was cleaning the gates. It was late autumn, and the first snow had begun to fall. My fingers were numb as I worked, scrubbing rust from the intricate metalwork with a wire brush. The gates loomed above me like giants, their surfaces etched with those strange, painful symbols that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. I was exhausted. I'd been awake since before dawn, and my hands shook as I worked. The brush slipped. A rusted nail, hidden in a decorative flourish I hadn't noticed, sliced deep into my palm. I gasped, dropping the brush. Blood welled up immediately, dark and hot, dripping onto the iron surface of the gate. The pain was sharp and immediate, and I pressed my other hand over the wound, trying to stem the flow. But then something impossible happened. The iron beneath my bleeding hand moved. Not dramatically. Not obviously, but I felt it shift, the metal warming and softening like clay. The nail that had cut me bent backward, smoothing itself flat. And where my blood had fallen, the rust disappeared, leaving the iron bright and clean and humming with an energy that made my teeth ache. I stared, frozen, as the wound on my palm began to close. Not heal, not the slow, natural process of skin knitting together over days. Close. Immediately, the torn flesh sealed itself as if an invisible needle were stitching it shut, and within seconds, only a thin pink line remained. The gate sighed. Actually sighed. Like something that had been holding its breath for a very long time had finally exhaled. I should have been terrified, should have run screaming. But instead I felt comforted. Like the iron had reached out and embraced me. Like it had said, I won't let you hurt. Not here. Not with me. Thank you, I whispered. The gate hummed in response. Interesting. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. A boy stood in the courtyard shadows, maybe 14 or 15, dressed in the fine clothing of Lord Damon's household. Not a servant's rough wool, but the dark, scholarly robes of an apprentice. He was thin, with ink-stained fingers and observant eyes that gleamed with intelligence behind a fringe of dark hair. I recognized him vaguely, one of the Lord's students, always carrying books, always lurking in the library. Elias, I thought his name was. I didn't. I started, my mind racing. What had he seen? How long had he been watching? Would he report me? But he held up a hand, cutting off my panic. Don't worry, he said, stepping closer. His voice was soft, curious rather than accusatory. I'm not going to tell anyone. I've been watching you for weeks, actually. The way you talk to the walls when you think no one's listening. The way the metal responds to you. I don't know what you're talking about, I said automatically, the lie bitter on my tongue. He smiled, a small, knowing expression. Yes, you do. And I think I might know why. He glanced at the gate, then back at me. You're not cursed, Aria. You're connected. No one had spoken my name in 3 years. Hearing it now from this stranger made something crack inside my chest. Connected to what? I whispered. To them. He gestured at the keep around us. The walls, the gates, the iron-bound doors. To the old magic. The kind that remembers. The kind that most people think is dead. He studied my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. Tell me something. That mark on your collarbone. Have you always had it? Instinctively, my hand flew to my throat, covering the scar through my thin tunic. How do you know about that? Because I've seen it before. In books. Very old books. His expression turned serious, almost reverent. That's not just a birthmark, Aria. Cecile. A bloodline mark. I don't understand. Neither do I. Not yet. He pulled a small leather-bound journal from his robes and flipped it open to a page covered in careful sketches. But I'm going to find out. And I think you should too. Because whatever you are, whatever connection you have to this place. He looked up at the looming walls of Iron Mere. His expression unreadable. Lord Damon is collecting children like you for a reason. And I don't think it's a good one. That night I dreamed. I was standing in a vast forge, surrounded by molten metal and roaring fires. But I wasn't afraid. The heat didn't burn me. The smoke didn't choke me. Instead I felt home. Figures moved in the flames, tall, regal, wearing crowns of iron and robes that shimmered like liquid steel. They turned to look at me, and their eyes glowed with the same light as the forge fires. One of them stepped forward. A woman with my face, but older, stronger, carved from determination and grief. She spoke, and her voice resonated through the metal around us, through the very air itself. Aria Ilarion, daughter of iron, child of storms. The chains remember you. The gates remember you. We remember you. Who are you? I asked, but I already knew. We are what you will become. We are what they tried to destroy. We are the echo that refused to die. The forge brightened, impossibly bright, and I felt something inside me crack open, not breaking but awakening. Like a door I'd never known existed suddenly swinging wide. Remember us, the woman said. Remember yourself. Remember your name. Aria, I whispered. Aria Ilarion. I woke with tears on my face and the taste of iron on my tongue. Somewhere in the depths of Ironmere Keep, I heard the gates sing. And for the first time in 3 years I didn't feel alone. Elias taught me to read by candlelight in the library's forgotten corner. It started 3 nights after our conversation at the gates. He'd found me in the kitchens after the evening meal, slipped a folded piece of parchment into my hand, and disappeared before I could ask questions. The note had been simple: North Tower. Midnight. Bring nothing. Tell no one. I should have been afraid. Should have recognized it as a trap, a test. Some cruel game the Lord's apprentice was playing with a servant girl. But something in Elias's eyes that night at the gates had been genuine. Curious, yes. Calculating, perhaps. But not cruel. So I went. The North Tower Library was a maze of dust and shadows, shelves climbing toward a ceiling lost in darkness. Books lined every surface. Crumbling leather spines, scrolls wrapped in faded silk, tablets carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the lamplight. It smelled of old paper and older secrets, and when I stepped inside, I felt the metal hinges on the door hum a greeting. Elias was waiting at a table near the back, surrounded by open books and scattered parchments. He looked up when I entered, and something in his expression softened with relief. You came, he said. You asked, I replied, hovering in the doorway. Though I'm not sure why. Because you deserve answers. And because. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Because I think you might be the most important person in this keep, and you don't even know it yet. Over the next weeks, our midnight meetings became routine. Elias would finish his duties to Lord Damon, copying manuscripts, organizing the Lord's correspondence, attending tedious lessons on history and heraldry, and then slip away to the library where I'd be waiting. He taught me the alphabet first, scratching letters in charcoal on slate until my fingers were black and my head ached from concentration. "Why are you doing this?" I asked one night, struggling through a children's primer about farming seasons. "You could be reported for teaching a servant to read." "Lord Damon would." "Lord Damon doesn't care what his servants learn," Elias interrupted, "as long as they remain useful. Besides..." He slid another book across the table toward me, this one bound in dark leather, its pages yellowed with age. "Reading isn't what we're really doing here." I looked down at the open page. The text was incomprehensible, written in a script that made my eyes water. But in the margins, someone had drawn careful illustrations. Symbols, diagrams, human figures surrounded by what looked like flames or lightning. "What is this?" "A history of the Iron-born." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The bloodline that ruled the northern reaches before the Purge. They called them the Ilarian Queens, monarchs who didn't just command armies, but the very elements themselves. Metal, stone, storm." He tapped the illustration of a crowned figure, their hand raised as swords floated in the air around them. They could hear the memory stored in iron and steel, could command it, reshape it, heal with it or destroy with it. My mouth went dry. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Elias's eyes met mine, intense and knowing. "You've been talking to the walls for months, Aria. The gates sealed your wound. The metal in this keep responds to you in ways it responds to no one else." He reached across the table and gently pulled down the collar of my tunic, exposing the scar on my collarbone. "And you carry their mark." I flinched back, covering the mark with my hand. "You said it was a bloodline seal. You didn't say it belonged to extinct royalty." "Because I needed to be sure." He flipped through the book until he found what he was looking for. A full-page illustration of the Ilarian royal crest. A star split by lightning, identical to the scar on my skin. The House of Ilarion was executed 25 years ago. Every member of the royal family, hunted down and killed in what the histories call the Purge of Storms. They say it was because the queens had grown tyrannical, drunk on their power. But I've read the older texts, the ones written before the Purge. He leaned forward. The Ilarians weren't tyrants. They were protectors. And someone wanted them dead badly enough to erase them from history. "If they were all killed," I said slowly, my heart hammering, "then how?" "I don't know," Elias admitted. "But you're here. You have their mark. You have their gift." He closed the book carefully. "Which means someone survived. Someone kept you hidden. And someone sold you to Gregor Vale without knowing what you were. Or knowing exactly what I was," I thought, remembering the way the merchant had examined my scar. The way he'd called it celestial marking, and smiled that cold, calculating smile. Elias made me practice. Late at night, when the keep had fallen silent and even the servants were asleep, he would bring me objects made of metal. A spoon from the kitchens. A candlestick from one of the guest chambers. A small iron key that opened nothing. "Touch them," he'd instruct. "Not with your hands, with your mind. Listen to what they remember." At first, I felt nothing but cold metal and my own embarrassment. But gradually, like learning to hear a whisper in a crowded room, I began to sense something beneath the surface. Impressions, emotions, fragments of moments caught in the metal like insects in amber. The spoon remembered warmth. A child's laughter. The candlestick remembered fire. Wax dripping. Shadows dancing on walls. The key remembered nothing. It had never been used, never opened a lock, never fulfilled its purpose. Its memory was blank, waiting. "Good," Elias breathed, watching my face. "You're hearing them. Now try something harder." He placed a dagger on the table between us. The moment my fingers brushed the blade, I gasped and jerked back. The memory slammed into me like a physical blow. Screaming, blood, the terrible wet sound of steel parting flesh. Battle. Men dying. The dagger rising and falling, until its edge was notched and its surface was painted red. "It's all right," Elias said quickly, steadying me. Breathe. You're safe. It's just memory, it can't hurt you. It already did, I whispered, my hands shaking. I felt it. The killing. The pain. I know. Weapons carry the darkest echoes because they're made for violence. He pushed the dagger closer. But that's not all they are. Memory can be rewritten, Aria. The echo gift doesn't just hear, it transforms. Try again. This time don't just listen. Speak back. I didn't want to touch it again. Didn't want to feel that cascade of death and agony. But Elias was watching me with such faith, such certainty, that I couldn't refuse. I placed both hands on the blade and let the echoes wash over me. Screaming. Blood. The face of a young soldier, eyes wide with shock as the dagger entered his chest. No, I thought firmly. Mo. That's not all you are. You were forged by a smith who sang while he worked. You were carried by a farmer who used you to cut bread for his children. You were loved before you were bloodied. The memory shifted. The battlefield faded, replaced by earlier moments. The warmth of the forge, the careful hands shaping metal, the pride of creation. The dagger's edge, sharp and clean and new, reflecting sunlight. You don't have to remember only pain, I told it. You can choose. The blade grew warm under my palms. Then, impossibly, it began to change. The notches in its edge smoothed out. The blood-dark stains faded to silver. When I finally released it and opened my eyes, the dagger looked newborn, unmarred, peaceful, as if it had never tasted violence at all. Elias stared at the transformed blade, then at me. His expression caught between awe and something that looked almost like fear. The echo gift, he whispered. It's real. You're real. We didn't notice Gregor Vale standing in the doorway. I don't know how long he'd been there, watching from the shadows while I transformed the dagger. But when he stepped into the lamplight, his smile was the same cold expression I remembered from the day he'd bought me. Fascinating, he said softly. Elias shot to his feet, positioning himself between Gregor and me. This is a private study session. You have no business here. On the contrary, Gregor's eyes never left me. I have every business with property I purchased, especially when that property turns out to be far more valuable than anticipated. He tilted his head. The echo gift. I'd heard legends, of course, but I never thought I'd see it manifest. Lord Damon will be very pleased. My blood turned to ice. You can't tell him. Can't I? Gregor's smile widened. Child, I brought you here specifically because of that mark on your skin. Do you think I'm a merchant of stones? I'm a collector of potential. And you, little Aria, have more potential than you could possibly imagine. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. Elias grabbed my arm, his face pale. We need to run. Tonight. But before we could move, I felt it. A disturbance in the metal around us, a tremor of wrongness that made my teeth ache. The iron torches along the walls flickered and dimmed, their flames shrinking as if trying to hide. The keep itself was afraid. Elias, I whispered. Something's coming. They came for me an hour before dawn. I tried to prepare, tried to gather my meager belongings and slip out through the servants' entrance the way Elias had instructed. But Lord Damon's guards moved faster than we'd anticipated. 6 of them, armed and armored, surrounding my sleeping pallet before I could even stand. The other servants scattered like mice, pressing themselves against the walls, desperate not to be noticed. I didn't blame them. Self-preservation was all any of us had. The Lord wishes to see you, the captain said. His voice wasn't cruel, just professional. Come quietly, and you won't be harmed. I looked past him to where Elias stood in the doorway. His face anguished, one hand raised as if he wanted to intervene but knew it would be useless. Eyes met. I'll find you, his expression said. I'll get you out. The guards closed around me, their armor rattling with each step. But as they led me down the corridor toward Lord Damon's chambers, I noticed something strange. The iron torches were flickering again, not dying but pulsing, like heartbeats. like warnings. And in the metal of the guard's armor, I could hear whispers, faint, terrified, grieving. Run. Flee. They'll break you. We remember the others. We remember. The others. Breathe. But no one answered. The guards marched me deeper into Ironmere Keep, toward the heart of the fortress where the old magic slept and the Lord's ambitions festered like rot in the walls. Behind me, the iron torches guttered out one by one, as if the keep itself was closing its eyes, unable to watch what came next. The Vault of Echoes existed in a place where screaming went to die. 3 levels beneath Ironmere Keep, past the wine cellars and storage chambers, past the servants' crypts and the forgotten armories, there was a door that had no business existing. It was made entirely of iron, not forged but grown like the metal itself had twisted up from the earth in agony and solidified into a barrier. Lord Damon Vale's guards didn't speak as they dragged me down the spiraling stairs. They didn't need to. The air grew colder with each descending step, thick with a dampness that tasted of rust and old blood. And beneath it all, I could hear the whispers. Not the comforting murmurs of the gates and walls I'd grown accustomed to. These were different, fractured, anguished, like thousands of voices screaming at once, their words shattered into incomprehensible fragments. Please no, please not again, remember us, they broke us, we broke, we shattered, we. What is this place? I managed, my voice cracking. The captain glanced back at me, and for just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Pity, perhaps, or recognition of what I was about to become. Where the Lord keeps his experiments, he said. Then he opened the iron door, and the screaming got louder. The vault was a perfect circle carved from black stone. Iron chains hung from the ceiling like the ribs of some massive beast. Along the walls, symbols had been etched deep into the rock, the same painful writhing runes I'd seen on the gates, but here they glowed faintly red, pulsing like infected wounds. And in the center of the room stood Lord Damon Vale. I'd seen him before, of course, from a distance, moving through his keep like a shadow that owned everything it touched. But up close, he was worse than I'd imagined. Tall and gaunt, with eyes so pale they looked colorless, like ice over deep water. His robes were black trimmed with silver, and his fingers, gods, his fingers were stained dark, as if he'd been handling something that had left permanent marks. 3 figures stood beside him. Mages, I realized, recognizing the ritualistic robes and the sick feeling that radiated from them like heat from a forge. One held a silver bowl. Another carried a blade that hummed with wrongness. The third was taking notes. Aria, Lord Damon said, and hearing my name in his mouth felt like a violation. Thank you for joining us. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but given your recent revelation, I thought it best we accelerate our timeline. I don't know what you want, I said, hating how my voice shook. Don't you? He gestured to the chains. Gregor told me about your little demonstration. The echo gift, he called it. The ability to hear and reshape the memory of metal. A talent I've been searching for over 2 decades. He stepped closer, and I could smell something acrid on his breath. You see, there's a weapon, an ancient Ilarian relic called the Forge of Binding, that could grant its wielder absolute control over every kingdom in the north. But it requires a specific key, a specific bloodline, a specific sacrifice. The guards forced me to my knees. Iron shackles snapped around my wrists, my ankles, my throat. They were cold and too tight, biting into my skin until I felt blood welling up. And the moment my blood touched the iron, the vault screamed. Chains came alive. Not metaphorically. Not in my imagination. The iron shackles binding me twisted and writhed like serpents, tightening and loosening in rhythm with my racing heartbeat. The runes on the walls blazed brighter, their red glow painting everything in shades of fresh blood. Fascinating, Lord Damon murmured. Even untrained, the resonance is extraordinary. Begin the extraction. The mage with the blade approached. I tried to pull away, but the chains held me fast. He grabbed my arm, turning it to expose the pale underside of my wrist, and placed the edge of his humming blade against my skin. "This will hurt," he said, almost apologetically. He drew the knife down my forearm in one long, deliberate cut. The pain was immediate and sharp, but it was nothing compared to what came after. The mage held the silver bowl beneath my arm, catching the blood that flowed freely. And as my blood touched the metal of the bowl, something inside me broke open. Not physically, deeper than that. Like a door I'd been holding shut my entire life suddenly shattered off its hinges, and everything I'd been holding back came flooding out. The silver bowl cracked. Then it shattered, exploding into fragments that embedded themselves in the mage's hands. He screamed and stumbled backward, blood streaming between his fingers. The chains around me began to glow red-hot. "Contain it!" Lord Damon shouted, but his voice sounded distant, muffled beneath the roaring in my ears. I could hear everything. Every piece of metal in the keep, every sword, every nail, every iron fitting was screaming. Not in pain but in recognition. In rage. They knew me. Knew what I was. Knew what was being done to me. And they were furious. The second mage tried to restrain me, pressing his hands to my shoulders. But where he touched, the iron chains heated further, and suddenly they weren't restraining me anymore. They were protecting me. They wrapped around the mage's wrists and pulled, yanking him away from me with such force that I heard bones snap. "Impossible," Lord Damon breathed, but his eyes were gleaming with something worse than fear. Excitement. Greed. The resonance is even stronger than the old texts described. "If we can just..." Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it shook dust from the ceiling. The fortress trembled. And somewhere far above, I heard a voice I recognized shouting my name. Elias. He came for me like a scholar-turned-warrior, armed with nothing but desperation and stolen keys. The iron door to the vault exploded inward, not from force, but because the metal itself had decided to open. Elias stood in the doorway, his robes torn and bloody, his face pale but determined. "Get away from her," he said. Lord Damon laughed. "Foolish boy. You think you can stop this? She's the key to everything. Power that could reshape kingdoms, and you want to save her out of some misguided sense of morality. I want to save her because she's a person, not a weapon," Elias snapped. He pulled something from his robes, a small iron token carved with runes I recognized from our studies. "And because I know how to break your binding circles." He threw the token at the glowing symbols on the wall. The runes went dark, and the chains holding me dissolved into rust and fell away like ash. I collapsed forward, gasping, my arm still bleeding freely. Elias was at my side in an instant, tearing strips from his robe to bind the wound. "Can you walk?" he asked urgently. "I can run," I said. Then we run. The keep fought us every step of the way. Not the building itself. The building wanted us to escape. I could feel it urging us forward, opening doors before we reached them, dimming torches behind us to hide our path. But Lord Damon's guards swarmed through the corridors, and the mages who'd survived the vault were summoning something I could sense but not see. A darkness that pressed against the edges of my awareness like cold hands. We burst out into the main courtyard just as the first true storm of winter broke overhead. Rain fell in sheets, driven by winds that howled between the towers. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the fortress in stark flashes of white. And there, blocking our path to the gates, stood Lord Damon Vale. His robes whipped around him like living shadows. His eyes burned with that terrible, hungry light. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice cutting through the storm. "Not when you're finally awake. Not when I'm this close." He raised his hand and the iron gates, our only escape, began to grind shut. "No," I thought desperately. "Please no." But the gates didn't obey him. They shuddered, groaning with the effort of resisting his command. Because he was trying to control them through force, through the dark magic his mages had taught him. And I was asking them, pleading with them, "Please, help me, help us." The gates stopped closing. "Impossible," Damon snarled. You're untrained, half-conscious, bleeding out. You can't possibly. She doesn't need training, Elias said, stepping in front of me. She has something you'll never understand. The metal doesn't fear her. It loves her. Damon's face twisted with rage. He began to chant something in a language that made my skull ache, and the air around him darkened further. But I barely noticed, because my gaze had fallen on the statue. The iron colossus stood in the center of the courtyard, a monument to Ironmir's founder, 20 feet tall, cast in solid iron, depicting a warrior king with sword raised and face frozen in eternal triumph. It had stood there for centuries, weathered by rain and wind but unmoved, unmoving. Until I touched it. I didn't think. Didn't plan. I just stumbled forward, Elias shouting behind me, and pressed both hands against the statue's massive leg. The iron sang. Not the fragmented, anguished whispers of the vault. Not the warning hums of the gates. This was a symphony, powerful, ancient, waiting. The statue had been asleep for so long, dreaming of battles long past, of the warrior it had been built to honor. Wake up, I told it. Please. We need you. The metal beneath my hands grew warm, then hot. Then it moved. The colossus turned its head with a grinding screech of metal on metal. Its stone base cracked as it lifted one massive foot. The sword in its hand, a blade as long as I was tall, swung down in a slow, deliberate arc. Lord Damon's eyes went wide. No. No, that's not, you can't. The iron sword fell. It was over in an instant. One moment, Lord Damon Vale stood in the courtyard, master of his domain, architect of cruelty. The next, there was only crushed stone and spreading darkness where he'd been. The colossus straightened slowly, turned its massive head toward me, and in the lightning's flash, I swear I saw its iron features soften, almost smile. Then it returned to stillness, sword raised once more, as if it had never moved at all. The keep began to collapse. Not immediately, not dramatically, but I could feel it, the iron bones of Ironmir giving way, the metal screaming its grief and rage and terrible liberating joy. Every chain that had bound a servant, every cage that had held a child, every weapon that had tasted innocent blood, all of it breaking, shattering, remembering. We have to go. Elias grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the now open gates. The whole structure's coming down. We ran through the courtyard as the towers began to groan. Behind us, I heard the guards shouting, fleeing, the remaining mages abandoning their master's corpse. The rain fell harder, washing away blood and ash and the residue of dark magic. As we passed through the gates, they sang to me one final time. Thank you. Thank you. We are free. We are finally free. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears mixing with rain on my face. I'm so sorry it took so long. We ran into the forest beyond, not stopping until the sounds of destruction faded behind us. Only then did I turn to look back. Ironmir Keep stood silhouetted against the storm-dark sky, lightning dancing between its towers. As I watched, the central tower, Lord Damon's private chambers, collapsed inward with a sound like 1,000 swords breaking at once. And every piece of iron in that cursed place wailed. They called it the Night of Screaming Metal. Stories spread for years afterward, of a fortress that tore itself apart, of guards who fled with their ears bleeding, of metal that sang with voices of the dead. Some said it was divine judgment. Others claimed it was ancient magic finally breaking free. I knew the truth. It was both. Elias and I didn't speak for the first mile. We just walked, soaked and shivering, my wounded arm throbbing with each step. But eventually he stopped and turned to face me. Are you all right? He asked. I almost laughed. No, I don't think I'll ever be all right again. I know. He reached out and squeezed my uninjured hand. But you're alive. You're free. That has to count for something. I looked back toward where Ironmir's lights had been, now swallowed by darkness and distance. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, victorious. The girl who'd been sold for silver had just brought down the fortress that enslaved her. But all I felt was hollow, tired, changed in ways I didn't yet understand. The metal remembers everything, I said quietly. Every moment of pain, every drop of blood. I can still hear them, Elias. All those children he experimented on before me. All those screams trapped in the iron. Then we'll make sure they're remembered properly, Elias said. Not as experiments, not as victims, as people who deserved better. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure how. Wasn't sure what came next. Wasn't sure of anything except that I was alive and free, and would carry Ironmere's echoes with me forever. Come on, Elias said gently. We need to find shelter before you collapse. We walked into the wilderness together. Two survivors of a night that would become legend. Behind us, if you listened carefully, you could still hear it, faint and fading but unmistakable. The sound of metal screaming itself free. I didn't look back when Ironmere fell, but it still echoes in every heartbeat. 3 years in the wasteland teaches you what survival actually costs. We called ourselves travelers, wanderers, relic hunters, when we needed to explain why 2 young people with no family and no past were digging through abandoned settlements for scrap metal. Elias went by Eli. I answered to Ren, a name as forgettable as dust. The ashfields stretched for hundreds of miles south of Ironmere, a patchwork of dying villages and scorched earth where old wars had left their marks. The soil grew nothing but thornbush and bitter grass. The rivers ran brown with silt, and the people who survived there did so by scavenging what the world had thrown away. We fit right in. Elias had aged in those 3 years, not just in body, though he'd grown taller and leaner, all sharp angles and scholar's hands calloused from labor. But his eyes had aged too. He smiled less, startled at sudden sounds. At night, I'd wake to find him staring at the fire, his expression distant, still seeing the things we'd left behind. Understood. Had my own ghost. The metal still sang to me every moment of every day. Broken plows in abandoned fields. Rusted gates on empty houses. The nails holding together the wagon we'd traded 3 months of work to buy. All of it humming with memory, with echoes of lives lived and lost. At first I tried to shut it out. Tried to build walls in my mind the way I used to make myself small and invisible in my aunt's cottage. But the echo gift didn't work that way. Once awakened, it couldn't be silenced. So I learned to live with the whispers. To let them fade into background noise like wind or rain. To ignore the constant pull of metal wanting to be heard, wanting to be changed, wanting to be free. I'd freed Ironmere. That had been enough. That had to be enough. I told myself that every day for 3 years. The rumors started in the 2nd year. We'd stopped in a settlement called Greywater. Barely 20 families clinging to life around a poisoned well and failing crops. The blacksmith's daughter had cut herself badly on a broken scythe, the wound festering despite the healer's herbs. They were talking about amputation when Elias brought me to their forge. Don't, he'd said quietly, reading my expression. I know what you're thinking, but we can't. She's 13 years old, I interrupted. The same age I was when Damon tried to cut me open. And I can help her. If you use your gift, someone will notice. Let them notice. I pushed past him into the forge. The scythe that had cut her lay on the work table, its blade still stained with her blood. I placed my hands on it and listened. The metal was old, poorly maintained, filled with hairline fractures that had finally split and torn flesh. But beneath that, I could hear the smith who'd forged it, a careful craftsman now dead who'd sung while he worked. I sang his song back to the metal, reminded it of its purpose, to cut wheat, not children. To harvest, not harm. The blade reshaped itself beneath my hands. The fractures sealed. The edge dulled just enough to be safe, sharp enough to still be useful. When I brought it back to the blacksmith, reforged and whole, he stared at it like I'd performed a miracle. How did you? Old techniques, Elias said smoothly, stepping in. My sister studied metallurgy before the wars. She has a gift for it. Mister. The lie came easily now. We'd used it so many times. The blacksmith's daughter kept her arm. The wound healed. And within a week, Travelers were whispering about a ghost girl in the ash fields who could heal broken things just by touching them. We moved on quickly after that. But the rumors followed. The world was eating itself alive. Every village we passed through had the same story. Crops failing, trade routes collapsing, lords hoarding what little wealth remained while their people starved. In the north, warlords fought over territory that wasn't worth holding. In the south, cities crumbled as their foundations, built by Alarian magic centuries ago, finally gave way. The old world was dying, and nothing new was rising to replace it. "It's getting worse," Elias observed one night as we camped in the ruins of what had once been a way station. "The collapse is accelerating. Without the Alarians to maintain the deep infrastructure, everything they built is failing." "The Alarians are gone," I said flatly. "Dead for 25 years. Most of them." He looked at me across the fire. "But not all." "Don't." I stood abruptly, walking to the edge of our camp. "Don't start with this again. Aria. My name is Ren. Your name is Aria Ilarian, last of the iron-born queens, and pretending otherwise won't." "Won't what?" I turned on him, anger flaring hot in my chest. "Won't make me normal. Won't erase what I am." "You're right, it won't. But using my real name, claiming some dead dynasty's legacy, that won't fix the world either. It'll just make me a target." "You're already a target," Elias said quietly. "The moment you used your gift in Greywater, the moment you healed that scythe, you became visible again. And there are people looking for you, Aria. People who were there the night the Alarians fell. People who will recognize what you can do. Then we'll keep moving. Keep hiding. For how long? Another 3 years. 10. Your whole life." He shook his head. "That's not freedom. That's just a different kind of prison." I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him he was wrong. But the words died in my throat because deep down I knew he was right. Hiding had kept us alive. But it hadn't kept us free. The refugees found us 4 days later. A caravan of maybe 30 people. Families, mostly, with a few elderly and several children, fleeing south from a territory called the Bloodlands. They'd lost everything to a warlord's expansion and were heading for the coast, hoping to find passage to the islands where the fighting hadn't reached yet. Their wagon had broken down a mile from our camp, the axle cracked beyond the driver's skill to repair. Elias and I helped them drag it to the ruins of an old mill, where I examined the damage. The axle was iron-reinforced wood, split down the middle from stress and poor maintenance. A normal repair would take days and materials they didn't have. But I could hear the metal begging to help. "I can fix this," I said. Elias grabbed my arm, his voice low. "Aria, think about what you're doing." I looked at the refugees, at the children with hollow eyes and the parents with the kind of exhaustion that comes from running and never stopping. At the old woman clutching a bundle that I realized, with a sick feeling, was everything she owned in the world. "I am thinking," I said. "I'm thinking that if we don't help them, they'll die out here. And I'm tired of letting people die when I can stop it." I placed my hands on the broken axle and listened. The iron remembered being forged. Remembered the hammer's rhythm and the smith's careful hands. Remembered being shaped with purpose. To bear weight, to endure, to hold. "Remember," I told it. "Remember what you're meant to do." The metal hummed, then sang, then shifted beneath my palms. The crack sealed itself with a sound like thunder far away. The reinforcing bands tightened, strengthening the whole structure. When I stepped back, the axle was better than new. It was renewed, reforged by memory into something that would last. The refugees stared. The driver's mouth hung open. And from the tree line, I heard the sound of armored men moving into position. They came at dawn, 20 soldiers in the black and crimson of the Eastern Territories. We'd posted watches, but they were professionals, trained in silence and ambush. By the time Elias shook me awake, they'd already surrounded the mill. "Don't run," a voice called from the darkness. "Don't fight. We're not here for the refugees. We're here for the girl who heals metal with her hands." My blood turned to ice. A man stepped into the firelight, And I knew him immediately, not from memory but from the metal he wore. His armor was wrong, stained with something darker than rust. And when I listened to it I heard screaming, dozens of voices, hundreds, the armor of a massacre. "You," he said, looking directly at me, "have your mother's eyes." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. What? Serena Ilarion, the last true iron-born queen. He smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I'd ever seen. I was there the night we killed her. Watched her burn in the Crimson Forge with the rest of her traitorous line. She begged for her child's life, you know. Said her daughter was just an infant. Innocent. He tilted his head. Clearly she managed to hide you. I've been looking for 25 years. Varen. Elias breathed behind me. Lord Commander Varen. Daemon Vale's patron. Former patron, Varen corrected. Since you and your little weapon destroyed Ironmere, I've had to rebuild my network. Imagine my surprise when reports started filtering in of a ghost girl who could speak to metal. Who carried the Echo gift. His eyes gleamed. The gift that died with House Ilarion. Or so I thought. He raised his hand, and his soldiers moved in concert, practiced and precise. They grabbed Elias before either of us could react, forcing him to his knees with a blade pressed to his throat. No! I lunged forward, but two soldiers caught me, iron shackles snapping around my wrists before I could even think to resist. "Don't hurt him," I said desperately. "Please. He's no one. He's nothing to do with." "He's everything to do with you," Varen interrupted. "Which makes him useful. Here's what's going to happen, little Ilarion. I'm going to take your scholar. I'm going to bring him to the Crimson Forge. Yes, the same place your mother died. And you're going to follow, lone, unarmed, ready to surrender yourself and your gift. And if I don't, then I'll do to him what we did to your family, slowly, creatively, while making sure you hear every scream." He leaned closer, his breath hot against my face. "Come to the forge if you dare, your majesty. Come claim what's left of your legacy. Or watch another person you love burn because you were too weak to stop it." He straightened, gesturing to his soldiers. They dragged Elias away, and I fought against my shackles, screaming his name until my voice broke. Varen paused at the edge of the firelight. "Oh, and one more thing." He drew his sword, that terrible blood-stained blade, and carved something into the mill's iron door. The metal shrieked as he worked, and when he stepped back, I could read the message burning in my mind before I even saw it with my eyes. "Come to the forge if you dare. Or watch him die like your mother." Then they were gone, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness, taking Elias and leaving me chained in the ruins with refugees too terrified to meet my eyes. The shackles dissolved the moment I asked them to. Iron couldn't hold me. Not anymore. Not when I was finally, terribly ready to stop hiding from what I was. I stood in the empty mill, my whole body shaking with rage and grief and something else. Something that felt like acceptance. Like inevitability. Hiding had been another kind of slavery. Elias had been right. And now someone I loved was going to die because I'd been too afraid to claim my name. Too afraid to be what I was born to be. No more. I walked to the mill's broken wheel, a massive thing of wood and iron that hadn't turned in years. Placed both hands on it and felt the metal wake beneath my touch, eager and angry and ready. "I need a weapon," I told it. "I need armor. I need everything you can give me." The iron sang its answer, and I began to reshape it. I rode toward the Crimson Forge alone, as the sun rose over the ashfields. The refugees had given me a horse, a gift from the old woman whose life I'd saved. She'd pressed the reins into my hands and whispered, "Thank you, for trying to protect us, for being kind when you could have just run." I hadn't known what to say. Hadn't trusted my voice. So I just nodded and left. As I rode, I whispered the words Elias had taught me 3 years ago, reading from those ancient texts by candlelight. The vow of the iron-born queens. A promise I'd never thought I'd make. I am iron-born and iron-blessed. I am the voice that metal hears. I am the echo that will not fade. I am the memory that refuses to die. What is forged can feel. What feels can change. What changes can be free. I am Aria Ilarian. And I remember. The words tasted like truth. Like power. Like coming home. Behind me, the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Ahead, the crimson forge waited, ancient and terrible, the place where my mother had died and my legacy had been erased. Where one way or another my story would end. Or begin again. The crimson forge had been waiting for me my entire life. I felt at the moment I crested the final ridge and saw the ancient structure sprawling across the valley below. A massive complex of stone and metal that seemed to grow from the mountain itself, as if the earth had opened a wound and this place had bled forth. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys. Rivers of molten metal flowed through channels carved into the rock, glowing orange and red like veins filled with liquid fire. And above it all, the central forged tower reached toward the sky, crowned with flames that had burned for 1,000 years. This was where the iron-born queens had once shaped the world. Where they'd forged weapons that could level armies and tools that could build cities. Where my mother had died screaming, betrayed by those she'd trusted. Where my story would end one way or another. The horse beneath me trembled, sensing the heat and the wrongness emanating from the valley. I dismounted, running my hand along her neck in silent thanks, and sent her back toward safer ground. Then I walked into the forge alone. The metal recognized me before the guards did. I felt at the moment I stepped through the outer gates, every piece of iron in the complex suddenly aware, turning its attention toward me like flowers following the sun. The chains on the walls rattled. The weapons in the guard posts hummed. The very foundations of the forge trembled with something that felt almost like joy. Sister, daughter, queen, you came back. You came home. I'm here, I whispered. I'm here. The guards appeared then, a dozen of them in Varen's black and crimson, but they didn't attack. They just stared at me, weapons half-raised, uncertainty written across their faces. Let her through, a voice called from deeper in the complex. Varen's voice. She's expected. They parted like water, and I walked between them into the heart of the Crimson Forge. The central chamber was a cathedral of fire and iron. Massive chains hung from the vaulted ceiling, supporting walkways and platforms that crisscrossed the space like a spider's web. Below, rivers of molten metal flowed through carved channels, their heat making the air shimmer and dance. And in the center, rising from a pool of liquid iron, stood an altar. On that altar, bound with chains that glowed red-hot, was Elias. Aria, don't, he started, but his voice cut off as the chains tightened, making him gasp in pain. Dramatic, isn't it? Varen emerged from the shadows on the far side of the chamber, and I finally saw him fully in the forge light. His armor was obscene. It wasn't just black metal, it was wrong. Forged from something that shouldn't have been used for armor. As I listened to it, I heard voices I recognized. Echoes of power and grace and terrible dying screams. Ilarian metal. Forged from the bodies of my ancestors. You're wearing them. I breathed, horror and rage warring in my chest. You killed them and made them into the most powerful armor ever created, Varen finished, running his hand almost lovingly along the breastplate. Your mother's gift was strong, but she was weak, sentimental. She thought her power should be used to protect, to nurture. She didn't understand that true power requires sacrifice. He smiled. So we sacrificed her. And her husband. And every other Ilarian we could find. Their bodies went into the forge, and their essence went into this. He gestured to himself, to the armor that pulsed with stolen life. You're insane, I said. I'm practical. And soon I'll be unstoppable. He drew his sword, that same blood-stained blade I'd seen before. All I need is one more Ilarian. One more life to complete the binding. Your life, little queen. Your blood to seal the armor. Your gift to make it truly mine. That's not how the echo gift works, I said. You can't steal it. You can't force it. Metal responds to connection, not coercion. Then it's a good thing I don't plan to ask nicely. He raised the sword. Kill her slowly. I want the metal to taste her pain before she dies. The guards moved in. But the metal had other ideas. The moment the first guard raised his weapon, it dissolved in his hands. Not melted. Dissolved. The iron simply deciding it no longer wanted to be a weapon and flowing away like water. Every sword, every spear, every piece of armor in the chamber. All of it answering to me. What? Varen stared at his own blade, which had begun to vibrate in his grip. No, that's impossible. The binding should prevent. There is no binding stronger than choice, I said, walking forward. Around me, the metal in the forge began to sing, not the anguished whispers of Iron Mere, but something else. Something ancient and powerful and triumphant. You tried to enslave the echo gift, but you can't enslave memory. You can't cage choice. I raised my hands, and the molten rivers responded. The liquid metal rose from its channels, defying gravity, flowing upward in spiraling columns of light and heat. It circled the chamber like a living thing, like dragons made of fire and iron, and everywhere it touched, Varen's control crumbled. The guards fled. The walkways trembled. And the chains holding Elias shattered, dropping him onto the altar where he scrambled to safety. Only Varen remained, his armor flaring with dark light as he fought to maintain his stolen power. You think you can defeat me, he snarled. I've been perfecting this magic for 25 years. I've killed queens and burned kingdoms. I won't fall to a child who learned her gift from books and sentiment. He charged, and his armor-enhanced speed was terrifying. His sword came down like a falling star. But I didn't dodge. I caught the blade in my bare hands. The metal screamed. Not in pain, in recognition. In memory. The sword remembered everything. Every life it had taken. Every drop of blood it had spilled. But beneath that, it remembered something older. It remembered being forged by an Ilarian smith who'd sung while they worked. It remembered being blessed for protection, not slaughter. It remembered its true purpose. Come home, I told it. Remember what you were meant to be. The blade shattered. Not broke, shattered, exploding into fragments of light that dissolved before they hit the ground. Varen stumbled back, staring at the broken hilt in his hands. Impossible, he breathed. Nothing is impossible when the metal chooses. I stepped forward, and the molten rivers followed me like loyal hounds. You wear the bodies of my family. You think that gives you power. But all it gives you is their pain, their fear, their dying moments. Let me show you. I touched his armor, and opened the floodgates. The echoes poured through him like a tidal wave. Every moment of agony, every betrayal, every scream as the Ilarians burned in this very forge. My mother's voice crying out for her infant daughter. My father's last defiant words. The terror of children and elders and scholars and warriors. All of them dying, all of them remembering. And all of it stored in the armor Varen had forged from their remains. He fell to his knees, screaming, clutching his head as 25 years of stolen death crashed through his mind. The armor began to crack, light bleeding through the fractures. Stop, he gasped. Please. I didn't. I was following orders. So was everyone who ever committed an atrocity, I said quietly. But the metal remembers the truth. It remembers that you smiled while they burned. That you laughed when my mother begged for mercy. That you took pride in the extinction of an entire bloodline. What are you going to do? His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw fear there. Real bone-deep terror. Kill me. Become the monster you claim I am. I considered that. Considered how easy it would be to let the molten metal consume him. To give him the same death he'd given my family. To make him scream the way they'd screamed. But that wasn't who I was. That wasn't what the echo gift was meant for. No, I said finally. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to let you live with what you've done. I placed both hands on his chest and spoke the sacred phrase, the vow of the iron-born queens. What is forged can feel. What feels can change. The armor crumbled. Not violently, gently, peacefully. The stolen metal dissolved away from Varen's body, flowing toward the molten rivers where it could be purified, reforged, given new purpose and new memory. Free. Varen collapsed, suddenly mortal again, suddenly old and weak and human. He looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much and understood too late. "You sound like your mother," he whispered. Then he closed his eyes and didn't open them again. Elias found me kneeling by the molten river, my hands submerged in liquid metal that didn't burn. "Aria," he said softly, carefully, like he was afraid I might shatter. "Is it over?" "It's over," I confirmed, pulling my hands from the molten iron. They emerged unmarked, the metal clinging to my skin for just a moment before flowing away. Varen's dead. His soldiers fled. The forge is. I looked around at the vast chamber, at the rivers of metal that now flowed in gentle, harmonious patterns. The forge is free. He sank down beside me, and I saw he was trembling. "I thought I was going to watch you die. When he charged at you, when you caught his sword." "I know." I took his hand, squeezing gently. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For dragging you into this. Don't." He turned to face me fully, his eyes fierce despite the exhaustion written in every line of his body. "Don't apologize for being who you are, for claiming your name, for saving me." He smiled, weak but genuine. "Though maybe next time we could skip the part where I get used as bait." I laughed and it came out half sob. "I'll do my best." We sat there for a long time, two survivors in the heart of an ancient forge, while around us the metal sang songs of freedom and remembrance. And for the first time in my life I felt like I'd come home. 5 years later, the city of New Ilarion rose from the ruins of the old capital like a promise kept. Not rebuilt, remade. Every beam, every wall, every gate crafted from living metal that hummed with memory and purpose. The streets remembered laughter. The homes remembered warmth. The fountains remembered joy. Nothing here remembered pain. I made sure of that. I stood on the balcony of what people insisted on calling the palace, though I'd refused to let them make it anything grand. Just a building. Just a home. Below, in the main square, children played while their parents traded goods and shared stories. Music drifted up from the market. Someone was singing. "The delegation from the southern kingdoms is here," Elias said, joining me on the balcony. He walked with a slight limp now, a permanent reminder of the injuries he'd sustained in the Crimson Forge. He said it kept him humble. I said it made him more stubborn. We were both right. "Let me guess," I said. "They want an alliance. Or they want to know if the rumors about the Iron Queen are true. Or they want me to solve their political problems with magic. All three, actually." He handed me a scroll. "Though they're being very polite about it. They're terrified of me. Can you blame them? You destroyed Ironmere Keep. Brought down Lord Commander Varen. Built a city out of salvaged metal and pure will." He smiled. "You're legend, Aria. Whether you like it or not." "I hate it," I said flatly. "I didn't survive everything I survived to become some mythical figure that people pray to or fear. I'm just the last of the iron-born queens. Just the woman who can speak to metal and make it sing. Just the ruler who rebuilt a kingdom on the principle that nothing broken is beyond saving." He raised an eyebrow. "Just that." I sighed. "When did you get so eloquent?" "When you made me your advisor. Someone has to make you sound impressive in official documents." He grew more serious. "But they're not wrong to be in awe, Aria. What you've done here, creating a place where refugees and orphans and the forgotten can come and be safe, be seen, it matters. You matter. We matter," I corrected. "This isn't just me. It's everyone who chose to stay. To build. To remember the past without being imprisoned by it. Spoken like a true queen." "I'm not a queen." I'd said it 1,000 times, but it never seemed to stick. Queens rule by birthright or conquest. Just exist. And try to help when I can. Then what should we call you? I thought about that, looking out over the city that hummed with life and purpose. At the gates that welcomed instead of imprisoned. At the metal that sang with joy instead of screaming in pain. Aria of the broken chains, I said finally. That's enough. That night I walked through the hall of memory. It was a simple structure, a long corridor lined with sheets of polished iron. No decorations, no grand architecture, just metal pure and clean waiting. I'd created it in the first year of New Ilarian's founding. Place where people could come and touch the walls and share their stories, their pain, their lost loved ones, their moments of joy and sorrow and survival. The metal remembered it all. I ran my fingers along the smooth surface, feeling the echoes of hundreds of lives. A mother who'd lost her son to war. A farmer who'd watched his fields burn. A child who'd been sold like I'd been sold, who'd found her way here and learned she was worth more than silver. All of them remembered. All of them honored. All of them seen. They sold me for 25 pieces of silver, I whispered to the metal, thinking that was the price of a useless child. The walls hummed in response, warm and comforting. But silver melts, and I do not. Even metal remembers. I pressed my forehead against the cool iron and felt the city around me. Every gate, every beam, every nail, all of it alive with purpose. All of it choosing every day to stand, to hold, to shelter. All of it free. Somewhere in the northern reaches, in a village I'd never see again, my aunt was dying. I knew because the silver she'd been paid for me, that cursed pouch of 25 pieces, had found its way back to me 3 years ago. A merchant had brought it, saying an old woman had given it to him with instructions to deliver it to the Iron Queen. The coins had been worn smooth from handling, from guilt, from regret that came too late to change anything. I'd melted them down and reforged them into 25 small bells. They hung now in the hall of memory, ringing softly when the wind blew through. A reminder that everything, even betrayal, even pain, could be transformed into something that honored rather than harmed. My aunt would never know that. Would die with her guilt intact, her apologies unspoken. But the metal would remember. And that was enough. Elias found me there as dawn broke over New Ilarion. Couldn't sleep, he asked, settling down beside me on the stone bench. Thinking, I said. About where we've been. Where we're going. Whether any of this is real or just some fever dream I'm having in a cell somewhere. He laughed softly. It's real. Though I understand the impulse to doubt it. 5 years ago we were hiding in the ash fields, terrified of our own shadows. Now you're meeting with kings and queens, building cities, changing the world. We're building, I corrected. We're changing. Not me. Us. Always so humble. Always so realistic. I leaned against his shoulder, and he didn't pull away. We'd never defined what we were to each other. Partners, friends, something more complicated than either. It didn't matter. He was here. I was here. That was enough. Do you ever regret it? Yes. Helping me that night at Iron Mere. You could have had a normal life. Could have been a scholar in some safe library somewhere. I chose you, he said simply. And I'd choose you again. Every time. The bells rang softly in the wind. The city woke around us. And the metal sang its eternal song of memory and transformation and hope. They call me the Iron Queen. They say I destroyed an empire and built a kingdom from its ashes. That I can speak to metal and make it dance. That I'm the last echo of a bloodline thought extinct, returned to restore what was stolen. Some of that is true. Some of it is legend. I've stopped trying to correct the stories. People will believe what they need to believe. But here's what I know for certain. I was 7 years old when they weighed my worth in silver. 25 pieces for a cursed child. A transaction that should have ended with me forgotten in some lord's dungeon. Another nameless victim of a world that devours the powerless. Instead, it ended with me standing in a city built from broken things remade. with refugees and orphans and the forgotten finding shelter in walls that hum with welcome, with metal that sings instead of screams. They sold me thinking silver was valuable and I was not. They were wrong. Because silver melts. And I do not. Even metal remembers. From her balcony, Aria Ilarion, called the Iron Queen, though she preferred Aria of the Broken Chains, watched the sunrise paint her city in shades of gold and rose. Below, the first merchants were opening their stalls. Children were running through the streets, laughing. The great gates were swinging wide to welcome a new day. And in every piece of metal, every nail and hinge and loving crafted beam, she could hear the same song. We are free. We are remembered. We are home. She smiled. The world had tried to forget her. But metal has a long memory. And so does she. What is forged can feel. What feels can change. What changes can be free. The vow of the iron-born queens.